what is it that makes the biggest impact long-term on a child's mental health, a child's ability to kind of function well in life. And what was so clear from large volumes of research was that the most important thing for any child is to have an experience where their initiatives, right? The thoughts, feelings, ideas that are coming naturally from inside of a child, that are bubbling up from within a child, and are ultimately expressed through that child's actions or behavior. Something that a child looks at, something that a child does, they pick something up, they look at it, they play with it, whatever that, or a sound. And the child has with them a caregiver who is tuned into them, who immediately reads and then responds to that child's initiative, right? By just affirming it, right? So if a child says, ah, and mommy or daddy or caregiver says, ah, right, back to the child. Or if the child picks up a pen, right, and taps it, and the adult with them says, ah, you're tapping your pen, or you like your pen, anything like that, just acknowledging, I see you, here's what you're doing, here's what you're interested in. The child's experience then is, I'm being seen by another person is with me, I'm not just by myself, and all of a sudden that opens the door for connection and back and forth interaction, and ultimately opens the door for trusting relationship and bonds.
So, Andrew, we hear a lot of stuff, a lot of people talking about strategies that we can use with autistic children to help them in certain situations, but we don't hear so much about what the autistic child's experience of the situation and of our handling it is likely to be. What's your experience of focusing on this? Because I know this is an angle that you like to focus on. What has that experience taught you?
Yeah, I think it has taught me so much for me about learning how to be with particularly autistic children, and be helpful to autistic children as an holistic or non-autistic person. What I have learned that seems to be, I think, the most slippery, I want to say the most sort of slippery reality or deeper understanding for so many either non-autistic people, professionals, parents to understand, is that it's about, when I'm with an autistic child, the most important thing is not what I'm doing, but how I'm being when I am with that child. And so if I were to boil it all down to sort of what I've most learned, and how I see, where I see the greatest challenge for any of us trying to connect with and support autistic people, is that we don't have much training as human beings in the societies we live in about how to just be with one another and connect from a very open, authentic place.
And what, from doing that yourself and trying to focus on that angle, what have you learned about the autistic child's experience? Is there anything that people watching this might not be aware of that you've tuned into through the work that you do?
Absolutely. I think that one of the most powerful realizations I had, which I was fortunate to have many years ago, but I feel like all of my work is about returning to this realization, which was that as soon as I was as soon as I was in contact or trying to get into contact with an autistic child, a neurodivergent child, working in the systems of care that I was in. So that could be a classroom, right? It could be individually in a sort of a one-on-one intervention or therapy session, right? Whenever I was in a setting, the way that I would immediately approach a child was from a place of trying to do something, trying to make something happen, trying to teach, trying to support, trying, in some ways though, trying to fix, right? There's something wrong with this particular, child. And as an early childhood special educator, as a child development specialist, it's my job to try and fix, to try and change, right? Or address the problems, the deficits, the challenges. And so I was in this automatic mode, right, of not just being with, but trying to do something to another person. And what I began to, as soon as I began to realize that, it's like all of these light bulbs went off, and I thought, like, no wonder this kid is like heading in the other direction, moving as far away from me as quickly as possible, because I'm not just with them. I wasn't conveying a sense of kind of, I'm just here with you.
You're
I want to get
focusing
to
on
know
your
you.
agenda
Yes,
rather than tuning into at least making a joint agenda together with them.
that's exactly right, Guy. And I think every child can feel that.
So when you've done that, when you have tuned in, and I know it's your life's work, isn't it, to sort of
Mhm.
continually refine that tuning in process with a child, what sorts of things have you learned about how an autistic child experiences a particular situation, maybe a difficult situation, that we might miss when we're not tuning into the child?
Mm. Um, I'm learning, right? It's lifelong
Yeah.
learning. But I think there's so many layers to it, because I can't necessarily pretend to know what might be happening in a child's nervous system, brain, and body, right? What they might be thinking, what they might be feeling. All I can do is watch closely, be incredibly curious, and I think ultimately, most importantly, be very relaxed and very present.
Mm.
Meaning, not off in my head thinking about my plan or my goals or what I want to, right? But actually just be alert and be tuned in. Um, and so what I have found and what I've learned oftentimes from the 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 children that I'm working with is that the more relaxed and present and calm I can be, usually the more likely it is that they have more room and space to be themselves and begin to become more interested in me, curious about me, and to move towards me, or at least to not move away from me, right? So um, that is always a very powerful lesson, and it happens, all the time, right?
Yeah.
When I'm when I'm with an autistic child.
And when you do something like, for example, you leave a space, you don't feel this compulsion to fill all of the space with words and activities, and you leave a space, and you leave a space because you're interested in learning more about the child and giving the child um, time to process how they're feeling. Do you find when that happens, the child spontaneously shares with you more about what they're feeling? And if so, what sorts of things have you learned about a child's experience that surprised you?
Mm, yeah. Um, so I think, just to maybe not back up, but just sort of spotlight like maybe a few steps in that process. What I think oftentimes is so challenging is that it depends very heavily, right? The sort of my ability to slow down and just be and make contact or try to make contact with a child also depends really heavily on the environment that we're in, and also then the social environment that we're in. So, when I'm with a child in a family's home, oftentimes there's not just what's happening in my own nervous system and my own presence or attention with a child, but then there's also all of the other adults in the room, and there's the complexity of oftentimes parents, their own perhaps hopes, anxieties about here's Andrew, the professional, who's going to make something exciting happen, who's going to show us the way, who's going, right? So that all is impacting, I think, very heavily for lack of a better word, the energy in the environment, right? The sort of the energy of people's nervous systems, people's emotions, right? And all of that is very much active in the room, in the environment. So or perhaps it's in a school, if it's in a clinic, and I'm just sort of one-on-one, which rarely happens at this point in my career, but just one-on-one with a child. There's then the fact that this child might not be at all familiar with the room that we're in. So they're kind of confused, overwhelmed. They don't know, the toys, the materials. There could be lights and sounds and sensory stuff that they're not used to, that they're having to kind of sort through. So it's very complex. It's not, I wish sometimes it were as simple as just like me and my nervous system with another human being's nervous system, and then we could filter out everything else.
Yeah.
But that's almost never the case. So these are the kinds of things I think just to say that these are the complexities that we have to begin to think about and talk about more, that our whole system likes to boil down into do this strategy and everything will work, right? We want to try to simplify everything and say, you can just do this technique and everything will kind of flow. And what we're learning, I mean, this is beyond, sort of autism. We're learning about human beings and things like relationships and trauma and social connections. These things are very, very complex, right? What's happening between, one human being's nervous system and another. So we have to get away from the sort of like almost our desire, for these kinds of quick fixes, quick solutions, the 5 big techniques, right? That are going to work.
That come from Google. You put something in
Exactly.
and you get the 5 best ways to do this, and very formulaic. So really what you're saying to parents is, if you want to tune in and you want to relate to that child and you want to have access to what that child's experience is, and you want in a way also to ideally to enable the child to have access to what your experience of the situation is as well, at least on an intuitive level, so that you can build a bond between the two of you. Then in order for that, you just need to let go of any expectations and relieve the pressure on yourself. And as we've said in previous discussions, be kind to yourself. And when going back to, so we backed up from the last question, let's go back to the question. When you've done that, what sorts of things have you learned from the child's feedback about how they're reacting to it? So for example, let's say they might be you might be proposing a game to them, and they might sort of be very angry about this game to you for no reason at all. What sort of thing would you expect to learn about what the child was experiencing in that situation through this process of being really tuned in with them?
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's also what's amazing for me to see, having been in the field for 3+ decades. One of the amazing things is how complicated we have made this entire process of connecting human to human, right? We've especially in terms of autism care, we've shrouded it in all of this really complicated language and layers of excuse me, of different disciplines and different frameworks. And so one of the great things that that I've learned that's important um, to connect with research, right? With what many years of research in child development, and certainly understanding human development has spotlighted, which is, the Harvard Child Study Center, I think it's called, really put out a set of sort of briefs, of like videos and handouts, really trying to spotlight for caregivers what is it that makes the biggest impact long term on a child's like mental health, a child's ability to kind of function well in life. And what was so clear from large volumes of research was that the most important thing for any child is to have an experience where their initiatives, right, the thoughts, feelings, ideas that are coming naturally from inside of a child, that are bubbling up from within a child, and are ultimately expressed through that child's actions or behavior, something that a child looks at, something that a child does, they pick something up, they look at it, they play with it, whatever that, or a sound that a child makes, right? That when an initiative comes from a child, and the child, excuse me, the child has with them a caregiver who is tuned into them, who immediately reads and then responds to that child's initiative, right? By just affirming it, right? So if a child says ah, and mommy or daddy or caregiver says ah, right, back to the child. Or if the child picks up a pen, right, and taps it, and the adult with them says, ah, you're tapping your pen, or you like your pen, anything like that, just acknowledging, I see you, here's what you're doing, here's what you're interested in. When a child has that experience, all of a sudden, the connection with another human being begins, right? Because a child's experience then is, I'm being seen by another person is with me, I'm not just by myself. And all of a sudden, that opens the door for connection and back and forth interaction, and ultimately opens the door for trusting relationship and bonds to be established and deepened.
And that's, sorry, go on.
No, that's it.
And that's so important, isn't it? And it's something that as parents we can often overlook. We might not even notice. We need to make an effort sometimes even to notice that there's something to acknowledge or something to respond to, because in the daily course of life, especially when there's so many other things to be thinking about, a child will give a signal or will say something or that might sound pointless or ridiculous or irrelevant to us or not meaningful in any way, and so it gets ignored. And if the child is autistic and the parent's not autistic, or vice versa, that's going to be amplified because the child has a different way of thinking than the parent has a different way of thinking. What's important to the child or what's significant for the child will be irrelevant to the parent. And so it's almost like we have to train ourselves to listen out for the smallest signs that something might be being expressed, and to respect those signs, not to sort of put a quick subconscious judgment on it that makes us think this isn't relevant, this we can just pass over this, but to actually say, okay, I don't see what the significance of this is, but let's acknowledge it, let's see where it goes. Would you say that was a way of achieving what you're talking about?
Absolutely. That's it, Guy. And I think that again, when we look at, okay, so what happens typically, and why is that not kind of immediately, typically how parents will respond to their kids. I do think that when kids are with much younger babies, right? Parents are much more tuned in, right, and much more likely, because again, a child is not able yet to, to kind of have more complex interactions, right? A caregiver does learn very quickly that it's their job to kind of tune in and pay really close attention to their child's cues and signals,
Yeah.
and then really kind of feed them back in a way to a baby. So they might really mirror beautifully a child's sounds or motor movements, and then talk to the child or interact with the child based on the child's initiatives. But very quickly, as young kids begin to mature into, a few months of age, 6 months of age, and then later, parents then, of course, get so excited to kind of interact and connect more with their child. But what happens is parents then are kind of focusing more on, I have an idea, I'm excited about something, I want to share it with you, I want to get you to look at it, I want you to respond to me in particular ways. And that's where things can start to get much more challenging, especially for kids that have different brains and nervous systems, whose cues or communication may be, a bit different than sort of, what a quote unquote neurotypical child might be doing. So I think this is where things can begin to the mismatch can begin to happen much more quickly in those situations.
So to
When I
summarize,
say mismatch between parent and child, right?
yeah,
In those
yeah.
interactions, yeah.
So to summarize what we've talked about, I think we're talking about the best thing we can do as parents to be able to tune into and start to understand what the child's experiencing, and thereby build a relationship with them, a really meaningful relationship, is first of all to sort of at least have some. It's not going to be possible at all times of life, because there are very busy times, getting children ready for nursery or for school. It's never the optimal time to do this stuff, but at least find some time, some significant amounts of time, where we can just slow down, we can be with the child without trying to achieve anything, and without trying to sort of excite them and put our what we think will be nice activities for them in front of them, and we just follow their lead a little bit and listen out to some of the signs that they're expressing, that we might not recognize as attempts to communicate or expressions of something, unless we actually actively slow down and maybe explore those things a little bit, maybe acknowledge them and see where that leads, or maybe reflect them back to the child and see where that leads, or maybe even occasionally to ask the child, what do you mean by that, or something, and see where that leads. And just to be very much more focused on the child, giving them more space and listening more than talking. Is that a fair summary of what we've talked about?
Spot on. I think you just said it, like listening really is the key. And it is amazing to me in at least in my experiences, and this may be different for you or for different people. But I notice, because I've spent so much of my life studying, right, human interaction and relationships, and how people communicate with each other and learn to build trust and closeness. Like I've really studied a lot about something like, this idea of listening and being able to listen to other people. And it's incredible to me that we live in societies that don't actually learning to listen it's a skill. It's not, I think we're all born with the capacity, but we also grow up in societies that do not teach us how to really tune into and very actively and curiously and openly listen to other people. I've had extensive training in that, and I still am in situations and moments where my listening skills are terrible. So the reason why I say that is because, parents I believe that it would be incredibly helpful for all parents or anyone who's considering being a parent or anyone who's a caregiver. I think anyone in society in general should have we should all learn and have kind of rigorous education and practice about learning how to listen well to other people. None of us have this training, and it's no surprise that parents can really struggle to tune into and listen closely to their kids, because most of us also have not received that. I didn't receive that from my parents growing up. They had no idea how to listen well to other people. They were never trained. So I think this is a huge and major issue that I wish as a society we were talking more about and addressing.